My name's Callie, and I'm part of the X-Chem outreach team here at St. of X. And today I'm going to show you a little experiment we call Yeasty Beasties. So before we get started, as always, I want to thank our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do everything we do here at X-Chem, so thank you, Actua and Promo Science. So today we're going to be using yeast to see which one of these drinks has the most sugar. Pepsi, orange juice, milk, Gatorade, or water. So we know water doesn't have any sugar, so we're using that as our control variable. So in other words, that'll give us kind of a baseline to compare the rest of the drinks to. It'll show us how the experiment will go when the drink has no sugar. So I want to know which drink you guys think will have the most sugar, so make sure to leave your guesses in the chat so I can see them. So let's talk about the experiment. So the first step is to mix 75 mils of your drink with 100 mils of water. And then we need to heat them up and get them pretty hot, but not boiling, because yeast can't survive in an environment that's too hot. So I already have my drinks mixed with the right amount of water, and they've been sitting on a hot plate for a little bit, so they're all ready to go. I'm just going to use some mitts to bring them over. All right, so turn my hot plate off. All right, so now I'm going to use a funnel to put 2 teaspoons of yeast into each flask. And I'm using Erlenmeyer flasks for this experiment today, but you can also do this at home and just use like plastic water bottles. It works really well that way too. So I'm going to add a couple teaspoons of yeast really quickly, and then really fast, before any gas comes out, I'm going to cover the top of the flask with a balloon, just like that. All right? And onto the milk. Okay. And this is our blue Gatorade. This is our orange juice. And then lastly, our water. All right. So there we go. All right, so now that our yeast is in, we should see these balloons in a few minutes start to inflate by themselves. And while we watch that happen, I'm going to explain exactly how that works. So, did you know that yeast is actually alive? So yeast are tiny little microscopic organisms or microorganisms that humans have been using for thousands of years to make bread rise. And we're going to find out how this works today with our experiment. Oh, shoot. So, it actually has to do with the metabolism of the yeast, which is basically what it eats and what it turns food into. So just like you and me, our yeast have to get their food from the surrounding environment to grow and reproduce or to make more yeast. So yeast feed on sugars, which are in bread dough and in the drinks we're using in our experiment, and they turn their food into energy and produce an alcohol called ethanol, along with carbon dioxide gas, or CO2. So let's look at this diagram on our slide right here. This is a diagram for what's called a metabolic pathway. So as you can see, this little yellow shape, that represents the yeast cell. And as you can see, there's sugar going into it, and inside the cell is where a process called fermentation happens. And this process creates energy in the form of ATP. ATP is basically a molecule that stores energy so that the yeast cell can use it later on. And it also creates the ethanol and the CO2, which is released outside of the cell. So for this experiment, we're pretty much concerned with a little bit more of a simple metabolic pathway, and it looks like this. So basically, the sugar is consumed by the yeast, and the yeast in turn, through fermentation, produces carbon dioxide gas. And one really important thing to note for this experiment is that the more sugar the yeast has to feed on, the more carbon dioxide gas it's going to produce. So, just making sure you guys can see what's going on here because it's starting to happen a little bit already. So, like I mentioned earlier, the process is called fermentation. And so the carbon dioxide gas that is produced when yeast ferments is what makes the tiny little holes that you can see in bread. And it's also what's filling up our balloons right now. It's already starting to happen with our Pepsi here. The balloon is actually standing up on its own because of the carbon dioxide gas that's filling it up. So to recap, we know that when yeast is given sugar to feed on, it ferments and produces carbon dioxide gas. And we also know that the more sugar the yeast can consume, the more carbon dioxide gas it can produce. And that means that the more sugar is in these drinks, the more gas the yeast will release. Oh, there goes our Gatorade. This one's standing up on its own now. So the more sugar that the drinks have, the more sugar the yeast has to feed on and the more carbon dioxide gas it will produce. So this means that the drink that has the biggest balloon at the end has the most sugar in it. So our balloons are blowing up already. Might have to wait a little bit for some of them to kind of really get started. As you can see, our water isn't doing much. There's no sugar in this one, so it's not going to inflate too much. Warm water will cause yeast to become a little bit active and produce a little bit of gas, so we might see it inflate just a little bit. But we're not going to see a whole lot from that one. So that just shows us that the yeast needs sugar to produce lots of gas. So some of these are coming along pretty good. Our orange juice is filling up a little bit more here. You can see, especially in our Pepsi and our Gatorade, a little bit in our orange juice too. But you can see these bubbles happening at the top. That's the yeast bubbling up, and there's carbon dioxide gas kind of trapped in there. But eventually that'll make its way to the top and into the balloon. So you can definitely see it happening here. Our orange juice is just about ready to stand up on its own. Milk's got a little bit of gas in it, but not a whole lot. A little bit more than our water, but Still definitely not as much as some of our other drinks. So we're just going to wait a little bit, watch what happens. I think with a little help, our orange juice might stand up. There it goes. So far, of course, our smallest is the water. And then next smallest is the milk. It's got a little bit of something in it, but not quite to the point where it can stand up on its own yet. Orange juice, I think, is next, and then our Gatorade, and then our Pepsi is doing really well. So as we just kind of wait for these to blow up a little bit more, let's talk about the orange juice and the Gatorade here. They're kind of blowing up at about the same rate. The balloons are almost the same size, but orange juice is actually still a lot healthier for you than the Gatorade. So Gatorade is full of processed artificial sugars, and your body breaks those down really quickly. So it causes your blood sugar and your insulin levels to get really high really fast, and that's not good for you. And with the orange juice, it contains a lot more natural sugars, and they're digested a lot slower by your body, and it keeps your metabolism more stable. And orange juice also has a lot more vitamins and minerals that'll protect you from diseases and all that good stuff. We all know that that's good for our bodies. And the Gatorade's really lacking that kind of stuff. So even though the balloons might show that they have the same amount of sugar, this alone doesn't really determine how healthy they are for you. Even though they're about the same size, the orange juice is still a lot healthier for you than the Gatorade. Another interesting thing with the Gatorade is because it's marketed as sort of a sports drink and something you drink while you exercise and is good to keep you energized and all that, a lot of people assume that Gatorade's really healthy for you and good for you and good to drink all the time. But Gatorade actually has a lot of sugars in it. The artificial sugars, the kind that we don't like, well, we like them, but they're not very good for us. So it's good to know that Gatorade isn't as healthy as a lot of people think it is. Some of our mixtures are bubbling up a little bit more. Our orange juice is going here. Has some bubbles in it. Milk is bubbling a little bit too. See a little bit of gas in it, so when I squeeze the balloon, I can feel some stuff in there, but there's not a whole lot going on with the milk. You can see some bubbles. So let's talk about our other drinks. Like I said before, water, not doing a whole lot. There's a little bit of gas in there, and we can see, some bubbles forming at the top, but yeah, well, of course, we all know water has no sugar, so it's not going to do a whole lot. And then I'd say, well, the next one is milk. This one again, a little bit of gas in there. Not a whole lot going on. We can see some bubbles, so that means milk has a little bit of sugar, but not a whole lot. And the sugar that milk does have, of course, is natural sugars because it does come from cows. So nothing artificial. It's the kind of sugars that are a little bit better for our bodies. Next smallest, these two, orange juice and Gatorade, are pretty close, but orange juice is a little bit smaller. Yep, definitely has a good amount in there. Gatorade's next. Still has quite a bit of sugar in it. Can definitely see it bubbling up there. And then Pepsi is by far our biggest balloon. This one's getting pretty big, and if we left it for longer, maybe like 30 minutes or even an hour, Pepsi, the balloon would get really, really big because all of these bubbles up here would burst, and that CO2 would rise up into our balloon and make it inflate even more. So Pepsi, out of all our drinks, definitely has the most sugar. Not the good kind of sugar. It's definitely the artificial kind that isn't as good for us. So if your parents maybe don't let you drink pop all the time, that's why. So, does anybody have any questions about the experiment that we did today with yeast and sugar, or any questions about metabolisms. I'm going to get my friend Josie. There's a little bit of a delay between when you guys send a message in the chat and when I get to see it. So it might take a little bit for me to see your question, but I'm just going to get my friend Josie to send them to me as they come. All right, so it doesn't look like we have any questions for today. Thanks for watching. There's going to be more live videos like this one on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays every week. And this week is actually food week, so you're going to see more kind of things like this. And a really fun one is coming on Thursday that I think you guys should really watch. So thanks, everybody. Bye.